Lilies and Lilacs, Episode 1. Oh, Sweet Autumn Bliss.
Do you want to catch a lightning bolt in the chest, asshole? Well, do you?
Go ahead and try it, you finger-waggling wuss. It'll be the last thing you ever do.
Tessica stepped out into the street, and she tightened her jaw muscles. A growing bead of ire swelled behind her eyes. Two groups of people stood defiantly, facing one another, glaring aggressively. Their weapons were drawn, magic visually outlined mages' hands, and at any moment, the civility of the street would be shattered. Adventurers. They brought wealth and woes in equal measure. Despite the vast amount of gold their ilk typically brought into cities like Autumn Bliss, they also brought problems. Lots and lots of problems. Problems like this. Street brawling in the bright of day when locals were out and about. Tessica groaned as she eyed the groups. Over her many years of being around adventurers, she had seen commonalities within the structure of most questing parties. Each group had a frontline brawler of some kind. A mage, a slinking, shifting individual who was probably a thief, and either a fourth or fifth member who was some combination of the previously mentioned. At any moment, these out-of-towners would start their pointless combat right in the middle of the street, with no regard for the community or those who lived here. Inconsiderate pricks. Normally, Tessica wouldn't care, but these two groups were about to start thrashing outside of her tavern. Tessica was a young woman in her mid-20s, with long dark brown hair, a pair of light blue eyes, and she stood an average height for a human woman. She wore a light green dress, a pair of light brown leather boots, and she carried a serving tray in her hand. Today was a good day, with a bunch of people coming into her tavern for fine drinks and food. She really loved serving patrons, for they often brought with them interesting stories, in addition to sweet gold. She approached the pair of adventuring parties.
Hey, you all better calm down right now. Or if you must fight, take it further down the street.
Both groups, as well as many of the people in the crowd watching the out-of-towners, stopped, and they turned their attention to her. The adventurers beamed incredulous glares at her, while the locals grinned widely. Tessica sneered at the out-of-towners and placed her free hand on her hip. One of the mage-like adventurers pranced up to her and stared down at her with narrowed eyes and a snooty curvature of the lip. Based on the shimmer of the man's eyes and his body features, as well as the point of his ears, the man must have been a half-fae.
And who the hell do you think you are to talk to us like that, little lady? Don't you realize who we are?
Little lady? Oh, so you're that kind of guy. Well, listen here, you pompous, loudmouth, homeless drifter. I don't care how many monsters you've killed or how much treasure you've stolen. You can't just openly brawl in our community. This is where we live and where we do business.
Tessica stepped forward and poked the man in the chest.
So calm down or clear out. If you don't, then I'll call the city guard.
The mage stepped back as a look of disgust covered his face. One of the warriors from the other group started to laugh.
Oh no, not the city guard!
We're adventurers. We fight monsters on a regular basis. You think We're gonna be scared of some broken-ass city guards?
You should be more keen to obey our laws, especially if you hope to stay in our city.
The crowd parted for the speaker. Levin, a city guard captain, moved closer to the commotion. 2 other city guards were with him on either side. Levin was a tall, broad-shouldered guy with short, clean-cut brown hair, freckles on his cheeks, and a pair of light green eyes. To those who didn't know him, they might suspect him for a soft, poet sort of fellow. Tessica knew the real Levin, a man bound in honor who pushed himself every day by training to be the best protector he could be. Levin lived for the people of Autumn Bliss. He wore the brown, red, and yellow leather-colored armor of the city guard. Yellow dyed straps held the brown and red armor pieces together. The cuirass was brown, while the bracers and the greaves were red. His boots were dark brown. Like the other guards, Levin wielded a spear, although his weapon was a little more well-crafted than the common fare passed out to the other city guard members. A personalized weapon was the grand prize for the annual Autumn Bliss boxing tournament. As the record stood, the guard captain was on a 3-year winning streak. Levin walked right up to the mage in the front of Tessica, and then knocked the man further away by using his shoulder.
Hey Tess, are these adventurers causing a public disturbance?
As a matter of fact, they are.
In that case, you all need to separate and refrain from disrupting our community, otherwise you will be arrested.
You think you're actually going to arrest us? There are 3 of you and 8 of us.
Levin gave off a single and frustrated grunt as he pulled a whistle out from his pocket. He brought it to his lips, and then he blew. A high-pitched whine called throughout the air. The other guards also pulled out whistles, adding more volume to the noise. Seconds after their call, more whistles echoed from somewhere. The adventurers froze and looked around, but Tessica and the other citizens didn't react in the same surprised manner. The crowds moved out of the way, allowing for a clear path to be made. Moments later, members of the city guard rushed into the area. Dozens of armed guards surrounded the adventurers, all with spears pointing toward them. The bluster seeped out of the adventurers, and their aggressive stances deflated.
You're all welcome to enjoy the bounties of our city. However, if you wish to disrupt the peace, you will be dealt with. Make your choice, comply, or face the consequences.
One by one, the adventurers lowered their weapons, dismissed their magic, and averted their eyes from the piercing gaze of the guard captain. One group started to walk away, and Levin gestured toward them with a pointed finger. Several city guards began tailing them. Similarly, the other group skulked away. Levin turned to Tessica.
Why do they always have to be so much of a headache?
If they didn't bring in so much gold on average, I'd have to agree with you. They aren't all bad. And to be honest, these assholes were just overly aggressive and loud. I didn't care if they fought. I just didn't want them to do it here.
You may not care, but I do. And gold or no gold, these damned out-of-towners are more trouble than they're worth.
Levin and the pair of guards started to walk away, but Levin glanced back over his shoulder.
Let me know if anyone else bothers you, Tess.
Sure thing, Lev. Thanks again for keeping us safe. Autumn Bliss would crumble without you.
Yeah. Only 40 more years and I can retire.
Tessica chuckled to herself as she watched Levin disappear in the midst of the crowd. He had come a long way since their childhood imaginary games. Back then, they all wanted to be out-of-towners. Tessica stepped out further into the street and glanced up to the sign hanging above the door of her tavern. The words, Lilies and Lilacs, were carved into a wooden sign with the painted images of white and purple flowers arcing over the lettering. Lilies and Lilacs had been passed on to her from her father, who inherited it from his mother, the matriarch of the family. Tessica's grandmother was the original owner of the tavern, and once upon a time she had been an out-of-towner. Tessica let out another sigh, but grinned wider. She had come a long way too, and she had much further to go to live up to her family legacy. It was a warm day outside, with a clear sky and a gentle wind. Tessica moved toward the front door, opened it, and went inside. A chorus of laughter and conversation wrapped around Tessica. The tavern had a fairly large common area, with a bar at the far end of the room. A large doorway on the right wall led to the inn area of L&L. Numerous large circular tables were placed in the room, and at the moment every table was occupied. Lines of people stood around the bar. Tessica reviewed her patrons, and judging from their attire alone, less than one half of them were locals. The rest of her customers wore the obvious, outlandish clothing of mages, battle armor, had visible battle weapons, and carried themselves with the same sort of swagger that was typical of out-of-towners. As far back as Tessica could remember, adventurers had been a constant presence in the patronage of the tavern, and it had been that way since its beginning. Adventurer gold was nice, and for the most part, most people of that ilk were tolerable at best. Tessica noted where Zeddy, her hired muscle, sat. Zeddy was a lean woman around Tessica's age, with short black hair, dark brown eyes, and a wide smile on her face. She wore a light pink short-sleeved shirt that slightly exposed her midriff, a tan vest, and a pair of coal-black slacks. She also wore boots. Whenever patrons got too feisty, Zeddy would kindly subdue them and escort them out. At the moment, Zeddy was playing cards with several local mill workers. Based on her delight, she was winning. Morden moved behind the bar, pouring drinks for the patrons who collected around him. It was quite funny, but about half of those patrons gave Morden the eyes that begged for sweet kisses. Morden was a very handsome fellow, and Tessica could understand why locals and out-of-towners alike often sought to spark connection with him. He was tall, muscular, had beautiful dark brown eyes, well-groomed black hair, and a demeanor that was almost as warm as Zeddy's. Morden wore a long-sleeved beige shirt, a tan pair of slacks, leather boots, and a matching brown belt. He always greeted patrons with a small-town charm, which seemed to make eager would-be suitors salivate all the more. Still, Morden always kept it friendly. Along the left wall of the common room was a wooden board where various notices, bounties, and adventure requests would be posted. To the right of the board and left of the bar in the far corner was a small stage where the occasional bard, troupe, or performer would entertain patrons. Tessica moved back behind the bar, and Morden stepped up beside her, a mug of ale in his hand.
So did they actually, start fighting?
Thank goodness not. Levin swooped in and threatened to arrest them if they pressed it any further. Any trouble in here?
Nope, aside from the regular sort of rowdiness. Then again, it's not even sundown yet, so it might get more lively later.
So long as there aren't any brawls, I don't mind the rowdiness. If they want to fight, they can go to the Pork's Pint. Have you taken your lunch break yet?
I was waiting for Bonta to come by. That's okay, right?
Certainly. Just wave me down and let me know. Is that drink from one of the tables?
Yes, indeed. Table 4 ordered 3 pints and an order of fried potato slices.
I'll take the drinks. Go into the back and whip up the food, will ya? Also, take a quick inventory on how we're doing with beer. Thanks.
Morden rested the mug on the bar's surface and walked to the doorway on the other end of the bar, where the kitchen and storage area were located. Tessica filled 2 more mugs, placed them on her tray along with the third, and then waltzed through the crowd. Some of the locals smiled warmly at her. Many of them had either grown up around her or watched her do so. Table 4 had a trio of rough-looking individuals gathered around the circular table. Thematically, they all wore black garments. One of the trio wore black leather armor, a black hood, and had a nasty scar over his right eye. A curved dagger was on his belt, and it appeared to be his only weapon. The second of the trio was a woman who had creepy skull shoulder pads, and she wore black plate armor. A sheathed longsword was on her back, and a skull was carved into the end of the hilt. The last member wore a black robe made of super soft velvet. He had a dark wooden staff with an ox skull as its headpiece. Tessica walked over to the table.
Hi there, welcome to Lilies and Lilacs. Did you all order the 3 rock gnome stouts? And an order of fried potato slices?
Oh, hi there! Yes, we did! I'm so glad you came by. I'm so thirsty.
We heard this place was fairly nice. I totally love your sign. It's so pretty.
Why, thank you. I've never seen you 3 before. Are you new to Autumn Bliss?
As a matter of fact, this is our first time here. This town is so cute. It looks quaint, and it's so far removed from the hustle and bustle of the major cities. Have any great recommendations for stops?
I have a few suggestions. I have a good friend who owns a general store for adventurers. The store is called the Goddess Garden, and they offer reasonable deals for all sorts of useful tools and supplies. Ask for Faunica, and she'll take great care of you. There are a few enchanters, but the best one is a wizard named Noswald. His little store is just called Noswald's. He's a bit pricey, but his magical items are among the best you can find. And if you're looking for a great inn...
Tessica flourished with her hand to the open doorway to the right side of the room.
We offer lovely rooms at reasonable rates. If you're interested, my man Vonrad will take care of you.
Well, we already have rooms at the Blue Rooster, but we'll keep it in mind the next time we're in town. We're adventurers, and we're on our way to Ocean Crest. There's talk about a ruin with possible treasure.
Oh, I think I did hear about that. Several other adventurer groups were headed through the jungles to the south. Do you all have a team name?
We're the Scions of Darkness.
The trio all took flourishing poses before bursting into laughter. Even Tessica chuckled lightly.
My bartender Mordon will be over with your food in just a bit. Please let us know if there's anything else you need.
Tessica started to walk back toward the bar. A smile was plastered on her face. But then something pinched her right butt cheek. Tessica stopped, and her whole body tensed. A collection of grubby fingers had been the source of the pinch, and a greasy laugh rippled on the air. Her mouth contorted swiftly, and a white-hot hate exploded in her chest. To make matters worse, the whole tavern went dead silent. Slowly, Tessica turned around. A broad-chested, bare-chested, bearded man sat at one of the tables, and a creepy smirk hovered under his bulbous nose. A great axe was on the table before him. There were 3 other adventurers at the table too, but Tessica only saw the man who had accosted her. He opened his mouth to say something, but Tessica's fist was swifter than his words. Despite the dainty nature of Tessica's form, her punch was forceful enough to knock the man on the flat of the table. Slowly, the man turned back up to glare at Tessica, who stood defiantly with a scowl.
You stupid bitch!
Even as the man rose to his feet, towering over Tessica, she bolstered her legs, balled her fists tighter, and intensified her discontent. For just a moment, the adventurer glanced over Tessica's head. Zeddy placed a hand on Tessica's shoulder, beamed an amused smile at her, and then slipped in between Tessica and the man. Another hand fell on Tessica's shoulder, and this time it was Morden's.
Come on, boss. This way.
Tessica gave off a slight grunt as she allowed herself to be led away. Zeddy stood calmly and smirked up at the adventurer, who had a bruise starting to form on his cheek. The man's fists were formed into tight bundles.
You and your friends need to leave now.
Oh, is that so? We're not going anywhere
In an instant, Zeddy spun around and delivered a spinning sidekick to the man's stomach. He hunched over, and his eyes bulged out. Zeddy grabbed the man by his ears and slammed his face against the table's edge. A savage crack rippled through the air. He fell to the ground and grabbed his face as blood seeped out in steady streams. One of the other people seated at the table, a lady, started to get up aggressively, and Zeddy pivoted toward her. She kicked the adventurer in the face, and the adventurer collapsed down onto the tabletop. The other two adventurers on the other side of the table rose and drew their weapons. But they froze when the Scions of Darkness stepped behind them. Daggers and swords pointed to their backs. The Scions didn't say anything, but they glared hard at the friends of the pincher.
Okay. We'll go.
Yeah, go. And don't you ever think of coming back either.
The two conscious adventurers took their unconscious friend and their bleeding one out of the tavern. Morden emerged from the back room with a mop and a bucket.
Ladies, gentlemen, and travelers, I apologize for that disturbance. Please, enjoy a round on me. And for the Scions of Darkness, you get 2 rounds.
The other patrons gave out a cheer, and the trio who made up the Scions of Darkness gave little nods. Zeddy scooped Tessica in a side hug.
Wow, that was an amazing punch! You knocked his ass against the table. How's your butt? And your hand?
My hand hurts, but not as bad as my butt. Ugh, that bastard squeezed me so tight. I'm going to have a bruise. Thanks for taking care of him.
It's what you pay me for. Excuse me while I go back to mingling.
Zeddy sauntered over to where the Scions of Darkness were seated, and a conversation sprung up within several breaths. Zeddy had always been extremely friendly, even upon their first meeting. Tessica grinned while she slowly rubbed the spot on her backside. A small tingle had started to angrily hiss at her. Her hand stung a little, but it was slowly starting to feel a little better. Morden finished with the mopping, but he gazed at the doorway, to where a new patron entered. Tessica followed his line of sight. Bonta, the half-ogre, stood there beaming an adorable look at Morden. The half-ogre was over 6.5 feet tall, with a set of broad shoulders, a full bosom, and arms far larger and more toned than most human men Tessica knew. Her thighs and calves were so well defined. Bonta had shoulder-length platinum blonde hair and deep brown-colored skin. She wore a pair of brown work boots, some worn black trousers, and a thick forest green-colored short-sleeved shirt. Bonta's eyes were sapphire blue-colored. A large wood axe leaned against her shoulder. Tessica glanced back at Morden, who now eagerly stared at her.
Go. Take an hour and a half.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's lovely to see you again.
You too.
Tessica moved back behind the bar and began serving the drink orders to the patrons who came up. For the most part, most of the clientele who came to Lilies and Lilacs were fairly respectful. Whenever inappropriate behavior had to be squashed, it was usually connected to out-of-towners. An hour and a half seemed to melt away, and as soon as Morden came back, Tessica walked over to the inside of the building. The inn portion of Lilies and Lilacs consisted of a 2-story addition that Tessica's grandmother built later in her life. The initial lobby of the inn was quite welcoming, with a floral couch against one wall, across from the counter where Vonrad sat on a stool. Behind the counter and behind Vonrad were 14 hooks with placard numbers. Only a fourth of the hooks had keys dangling from them. 5 rooms were on the first floor, and the remainder were on the second. Tessica had an executive suite on the first floor. Zeddy and Vonred also had rooms, and their stay was covered free of charge. Vonrad was an older man who had been working with Lilies and Lilacs ever since Tessica's grandmother owned it. He was a sharply dressed man with a bright pink, long-sleeved shirt, a black jacket, and a pair of black slacks. When Vonrad smiled, the room seemed to get brighter. His hair was mostly gray, with several subtle hints of the red that it used to be. Vonrad had hazel eyes.
Good afternoon, little Miss Tess, and what can I do for you? Are you finally going to fire me and cast me out into the unforgiving streets?
Not today, old man. Maybe tomorrow. How are we doing today?
No, not bad. We still have 4 rooms left, but it's still early. If you and Morden manage to imbue some of the lovely out-of-towners with more liquid happiness, we might be able to sell out again tonight.
I'll do my best. It's still probably too early to expect someone to get that drunk.
Oh, these are adventurers, my dear. They're still the same sort of precocious rapscallions they were in my youth. Autumn Bliss is 3 or 4 days' journey from the nearest town, and the comforts of a warm fire, strong drink, and soft bed are more powerful at times than the call for adventure. How about after my lunch break, I go see about filling those beds myself?
That sounds lovely. Take an hour and a half if you'd like.
Why, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll give Tauris your regards.
Vonrad hopped up from the stool and gracefully walked over to the front door, leading to the street. Tessica took his place and grinned once more. Vonrad and Tauris were wonderful constants in Tessica's young life, and just thinking about the pair tickled her insides with warmth. Those two had been like 2 adoring uncles. Another hour and a half came and went, and it was finally time for Tessica to take her own hour lunch away from Lilies and Lilacs. During her lunches, Tessica enjoyed strolling through the streets of her hometown. Autumn Bliss hadn't really changed since she was a little girl. It had always been a sleepy little town in the middle of nowhere. It was 3 days south of the nearest largest city of Chavant, and perhaps 5 days' journey north of the seaside city of Ocean Crest. To get to Ocean Crest, travelers had to navigate through the vast Swindell woodlands, where untold secrets and dangers hid. To the east of Autumn Bliss were the Tiger Eye Mountains, with cities far beyond its peaks. To the west were the Donatru swamplands, where monsters were said to dwell. Autumn Bliss was a fairly nice little town that had served for many decades as a sort of rest stop for passing merchants, adventurers, and travelers. In terms of population, Autumn Bliss had about 5,000 people or so. The afternoon breeze was quite warm today, which felt nice against her skin. Tessica walked on one of the busier avenues of the city, where other taverns were located as well. One of the taverns was a loud and lively dive bar called the Pork's Pint. The sign above the door had the image of an anthropomorphized pig guzzling down a large barrel of ale. The Pork's Pint was a place infamous for its bar fights, and in fact, that was a part of its appeal. That's why the owners, Jeremiah and Garin, charged a high cover fee to get in. Another tavern on the other side of the street was a hunter's club called the Badger's Den. Tessica hadn't been inside, as it was an exclusive club. Tessica gave a small scowl as she passed by the third tavern. A 2-story gaudy building with flowing banners and a really large sign that said, Spell-Stitched Spirits.
Please don't come out, please don't come out, please don't come.
The front door to the flashy tavern opened up, and a tall, lanky man with light green eyes, fair skin, and blonde hair stepped out. He was dressed in a frilly, long-sleeved blouse, a pair of tight leather pants, and a matching pair of boots. The man was none other than the half-fey business owner of the establishment, Wallister Cronton.
Ah, goddess damn it.
Tessica hurried her pace, and as she passed Wallister, the man smirked broadly.
How's business, Tessica? We're doing exceptionally well. Max capacity.
Tessica merely flipped him off as she stomped away. The man's laughter sent maddening spikes into her brain, but she pushed away the violent urges. As soon as Tessica rounded the corner, she arrived at the Autumn Bliss Market Square, where a majority of the shops and commerce were located. Numerous wooden vendor stalls created rows amidst the large square, and Tessica's destination was one of the stores on the other side of the square. Tessica had to walk through the length of the square to get to a lovely little shop called the Goddess's Garden. The shop itself was a decent size, and it wasn't the smallest shop in Autumn Bliss. The sign above the door had the depiction of a woman watering a garden of flowers, but instead of flowers, the stems had potions, backpacks, and other tools growing in the garden. Instead of water coming from the canister, golden coins dropped upon the items. Tessica smiled, opened the door, and walked inside.
Good afternoon. Welcome to... Oh, hey, is it your lunch break already? Today is just flying by. I've already had a couple dozen customers just since opening.
The woman behind the counter of the shop was a tall woman, perhaps 4 inches taller than Tessica. She had long, blondish brown hair that fell to her mid-chest, a pair of bright hazel eyes, and a usually charming smile on her lips. Fonica von Coutier had some red lipstick, some mauve-colored eyeshadow, and eyeliner that made her eyes pop. Her fingernails were painted mauve today, too. Fonica wore a long white dress with a brown leather belt, a pair of matching knee-high leather boots that laced up in the front, and a brown leather vest. The dress was sleeveless. The Goddess's Garden had shelves along the walls, and many trinkets, potions, and all manners of items adventurers could use while traveling or going through dungeons and ruins. In the center of the space were several tables, with other supplies for sale as well. Fonica had a back room where she kept her excess stock.
I'm glad you're busy today. Oh, I told a trio of adventurers about you. They're pretty great, and even stepped up to deal with another group who had a member who was being a little too handsy.
Oh no, with you? Or one of your staff?
With me. One of those bastards pinched my butt. I think it's going to leave a bruise.
Did you at least punch that jackass?
Oh, yes I did. I hit that son of a bitch as hard as I could. Seriously, some of these adventurers are the worst. Oh, however, the ones I referred to you are all right. They're called the Scions of Darkness. They're a bunch of sweethearts despite their team name. They're actually headed to Ocean Crest to scope out that possible ruin.
Ocean Crest? Well, if they're headed that far away, they'll probably need a lot of supplies. Thank you, Tess. What would I do without you?
What are best friends for? Besides, you always listen to me when I need to vent about stupid out-of-towners.
Fonica paused when the front door opened. The 3 members of the Scions of Darkness moved inside, and they gazed around to the various shelves and tabletops full of stuff.
Well, speak of the Archdracolich, my lovely friend here was just telling me about you. Are you all the Scions of Darkness?
Why, yes, ma'am, we are. The lady here told us you offered reasonable deals and that you would take good care of us.
And I shall, indeed. She also told me that you are all headed to Ocean Crest. Is that to do some sort of adventure?
Yes, there are some ruins in the area, and we're going to try our luck at striking it rich.
Well, then you're in luck. I have just the supplies and tools you need.
Fonica moved around the counter and strode with a confident gait. Tessica opened the front door and then waved back at Fonica.
Hey, I'm gonna walk around for a while. Are you still coming to L&L for dinner?
Are you kidding me? Of course I'm going to be there. How else am I going to shamelessly self-promote?
Tessica smiled as she left the goddess's garden and stepped out into the market square. There were a ton of out-of-towners in the city today, and each of them were gearing up for long journeys elsewhere. Exciting events and interesting places were out there beyond the horizon. A small pang of ache flickered in her heart as Tessica pondered her own life, for she was only able to go to those kinds of places in her imagination. Nothing exciting ever happened in Autumn Bliss. As Tessica maneuvered through the crowds, delightful fantasies danced in her mind. Tessica stopped and then looked around at the other people in the street. Most everyone kept moving, but a few people looked skyward. She turned her attention to the sky, but it was clear, aside from the clouds.
That must have been my imagination teasing me. Not fair, universe. Not fair.